Okay, so today we're going to be focusing on the midpoint of a graph when we're on a 2 points. Okay, when we have points on a graph, we're trying to find the midpoint, right? So say we have these 2 points here, and we want to find the halfway point. You're probably going to hear that word a lot, halfway point. That's what we call midpoint. Um, right, and the midpoint has a very specific formula for you to find it. It's really nice. Basically, you're just taking the averages of the two values, right? So on a regular number line right here, right? So if I had a regular number line, let's say this was 0, this was -1, this was -2, this was +1, this was +2, and let's just keep on going 3, 4, right? Let's say I had a point here, and let's call this point, I don't know, let's call this A. And then I had a point here, we'll call this B, right? If I want to find the midpoint, it'd be easy to just count in between. But if you notice, you count in between is not quite right, right? So you want to take the averages of those 2 points. So you could do like 4 plus -1. Well, those are 2 points, right? And then divide it by 2. 4 plus -1 is 3. 3 divided by 2 is equal to 1/2. 1.5. So it would be somewhere right around here. This would be the midpoint on a line because you're taking the averages, x1 plus x2 over 2, right? That's an average of those 2 points. That's exactly what a midpoint is. So the midpoint formula, since we're no longer doing this line, right? So this line would be the x1 plus x2 over 2. Well, this line right here, this is the y values. This would be the y1 plus y2 over 2, which will then allow us to find our midpoint. Okay? So there's a midpoint formula right here, x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Now, in this particular situation, you got to be careful because this represents, and I like to say x sub m. That's the x value of the midpoint, and this represents y sub m, and that's the y value of the midpoint. So that's why instead of having the numbers, it has that letter m for midpoint. Okay? All right. So, that's what we use there for those particular situations when we're trying to find specific things. I'm sorry, my pen's going out of whack. Okay, so that's why I have the M there. All right, so kind of like what I was just talking about here. This is what happens right here. So the midpoint formula on number line, you're just taking the two averages, exactly what it says here. And then this is what I was trying to drop there, but not as beautiful, right? So PQ has endpoints right here, right? So here's P and here's Q, right? They're going to have some X and Y values, right? You're going to use that midpoint formula. Okay. So in finding midpoint of the segment, the order of the endpoints does not matter. So it doesn't matter X1 and X2. Okay. Just as long as you're adding the X's together and adding the Y's together, that's what matters. Okay. So here's some examples to find the coordinates of the midpoint. Okay. So we want to label this one, right? I'm going to go ahead and label this X1, X2, Y2, X1, Y1. My apologies. And then this one, X2, Y2. And we're going to use our formula, remember, just in case, x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2. Okay? So now we have our formulas. We got our x's, right? So -5 plus 9 over 2, right? That's x1 plus x2. -5 plus 9 over 2, that's going to give me 4 over 2, or simply just 2. So this right here, I would call x sub m, and I'm going to talk about that more tomorrow. That's the x coordinate of the midpoint, okay? Now let's do our y values. So y1, which is 5, plus y2, which is -7 over 2, and that's a -7, okay? Now notice I'm adding -7, so this is going to give me -2 over 2, which is going to give me -1. So -1 is going to be my y value, my midpoint, or y sub m. So I take these two values together, right? My x sub m and my y sub m, and I get my midpoint 2 comma negative 1. So this would be my midpoint, okay, of the graph, right? Okay, let's try it a couple more times, okay? Again, let's go ahead and label. Labeling is so important. We kind of did that when we were talking about uh, distance, right? So let's go ahead and let's work on the x values. So x sub 1, right? Negative 5 plus x sub 2, right? So negative 5 plus negative 2 over 2, which is going to give me negative 7 over 2, or 3.5. Negative 3.5. Okay, remember that's x sub m. Okay, then you have your y values. Okay, so y1, 2 plus y2, which is negative 10 over 2. And that's going to be 2 plus negative 10 is negative 8 over 2 gives me negative 4. And that's going to be your y value of your midpoint. Okay, so your coordinate should be negative 3.5, comma, negative 4. Now, it's okay if you get decimals. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. So just make sure you're careful with that, okay? So you can do a couple more problems if you want to on your own. Do three and four, okay? But I'm gonna do 5 and 6, okay? Because they're different. They're on graphs. So I want to make sure that you're seeing this process. So there's two ways to do this. Now the easiest way is to get the coordinates and do the points. So the coordinates for here, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's going to be negative 4, comma 0, and then this one's going to be negative 2, comma negative 4. And then you can use your point formula, right? But what I like to do is I like to find the slope, right? Rise over run, right? So this one's 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're going down 4, right? And then run of 1, 2. So in order, what I like to do is I like to cut that in half to find the midpoint, right? That makes sense. So instead of going down 4, I go down 2. 1, 2. Instead of going right 2, I go right 1. And that's how I would find my midpoint whenever I'm using a graph. A little bit easier, and then you just get your coordinates 1, 2, 3. So the x value is going to be negative 3, and then 1, 2. So sometimes that's easy, right? Sometimes it's not, especially when the midpoint's a fraction, okay, or a decimal. So that's when you got to realize the slope, right? You're taking a slope and you're cutting it in half, okay? So negative 3 over 2 is that. And you can check it, always check it using your formula, right? And we'll do the same thing here. This one is really hard, right? So from this point right here, we got 3 comma 4, okay? And then this point right here is going to be 4 comma negative 2, right? Those are your 2 points. Now the slope here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 1. That's where it gets tricky. Because when I cut it in half, it's going to be 0.5, right? So we said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're going to go 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then we're going to go 1 half. And there's going to be our midpoint, which is going to be at 3.5, comma 1, right? So that's the way you can do it. Or you can do the slope formula, right? Or not the slope formula, sorry. The midpoint formula. X1, Y1, X2, Y2. Okay, so add 3 plus 4 divided by 2. 3 plus 4 is 7. 7 divided by 2 equals 3.5. That is my X value of my midpoint. And then my Y values, 1 plus negative 2 over 2. That gives me negative 1. Oops. No, wait a minute. That's not negative 2. 4, negative 2. Yeah. And that's. Oh, sorry. I was doing the midpoint. My apologies. 4 plus negative 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And that's going to be your Y midpoint. And then you have your midpoint formula, which again, 3.5, comma 1. See how that matches right there? You can always use your midpoint formula to check. Okay? All right, awesome. Thank you.